Now, look, I'm going to tell you one more thing. I just can't leave this without telling you. The New York, New Jersey Study Club, the L.D. Pankey Study Club up there, have 50 men in it. All those men came to the Institute later, and earlier they came to the Schuyler. And by the way, Dr. Jones back here started in this thing 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, long before the Institute started. And here he is back in 2. Did you come to 1 before you came to 2?
I came to 1 in 81.
And I just tell him about Bruce Stewart in Tulsa, Oklahoma. About 18 months ago, this fellow had probably the best practice in Oklahoma, with the exception maybe of Bill Lockhart. Very successful practice, associate. And I came and I saw Bruce Stewart in C1 on a Thursday morning, like this morning. I said, Bruce, what are you doing here? And he said, I'm taking C1. I said, you taking C1? He said, yes. And I said, how come? And he said, well, I've been sending money down here, and I thought I'd come down and see how you're spending it. His brother is an oil man, and his brother had been sending us about $5,000 a year, and Bruce belongs to the Class 1 Triple Plus Club, and he gives $1,000 a year and more too. And he said, beside my associate, I've been trying to get him to come down here. I've taught him what I know about this thing, but I don't have a teaching facilities to do what you all can do to him. And so I brought him along, and that's Tom, and I met his associate, Tom. And later I came back to C2, and then to C3, and he went through C4. And I said, and he told me, he said, don't you discourage people from coming that have been through here 10 years ago or heard you in the Pankey Man thing years ago, because things have changed, and I learned a lot. And I think that they should come as a refresher and put you back on the track again. I was getting stale. So I'm sharing this with you because here I'm trying to say to you to come back after 4 before you even finish 4. But on the other hand, there is something to it. And when I was talking about Bruce Larson, he knows Dr. Weaver in Seattle, which I don't even know, but Weaver sent me his x-rays and diagnostic, x-rays and a report on about every 18 months. Been about 8 years now. And Bruce, as I said, is 61 years old, and he's going to die with those teeth. And he lost a lot of bone, had periodontal surgery 3 times. Now, if you can do it when you get that far along, why did he ever get that way? They hear this man's a graduate of Princeton. What else you want him? He's a potential Class 2 patient. A minister or an educator is nearly, unless he inherited, is never Class 1. But what are we for if you have people like that? And by the way, when you get that, your Class 2 fee is better than your Class 1 fee now, because nearly all of you are getting the same fee from everybody. And that is bad, because you're overcharging your Class 2. You can't work for your Class 2 minus patients, many of them. Then when you get up to Class 1 plus, double plus, and triple plus, it makes you able to take care of the girl that taught your children all English in the Clark Gable High School. Eleanor Wilson, bless her heart, worked her life out. Her husband divorced her because she had a spastic brother and an arthritic mother that somebody had to take care of. She had no brothers and sisters to do it. She did. And 18 months later, her husband divorced her. And all these years she's been a divorcee, teaching school, wearing hand-me-down clothes from a thrift shop, a 7-year-old Chevrolet automobile that had very little attention, and about to lose her teeth when I saw her. And that was just 18 months or 2 years before I retired. That's 18 years ago. And she said, LD, I know I can't afford your fees, but will you examine my mouth and tell me what I need, and maybe send me to some young dentist that I can afford to take care of it? Well, what she needed, some young dentist, wasn't anybody you could send them to. And I said, Eleanor, you took all care of our 3 girls. Lindsay went to prep school. Couldn't get him to study, at home. He had too much water skiing and playing around, so we boys were that way. But the girls all got a good education at home in the high school. And so this girl educated him. And I said, I don't think you can afford my associates because they're not happy to work for that. I see Fred is not in here. I just wish he'd have been in here because a lot of times I'll do a case, but my associate wouldn't be interested in doing it because I'm getting enough fees from these other people. I feel comfortable to take care of Eldner. Now, if she's driving a truck and spending her money at a beer joint, I wouldn't feel so obligated to do that. So you're going to have to. It's a difference there. It really is. People that are deserving and all, she paid me $25 a month. I put her on a budget plan. She couldn't begin to pay the lab. I even financed the laboratory bill. So you can do these things, and I can afford to do it, you know. I didn't get a 2- fee that everybody gets. I got a better fee than a lot of people get for better cases, but in my practice, in our office, with our overhead being what it was, I kept my overhead at 50%, 48 to 52%. That was the criteria. And then, of course, you're in the 50% income tax bracket on earned income. At that time, we didn't have that. At some time, I got in the 65% income tax bracket, and that kills incentive, sure enough. And I might tell you I didn't work as hard as I would have if it's been 50%. Because I used to send my patients over to associates, and maybe that's good for you. Maybe you ought to define your objectives to not work so hard and live a little longer, you know, and all that sort of thing. Let me say one other thing. I had to tell you about these two things because they came up. Here's the one where you should. What about these elders? I never quit doing denture work. And I didn't quit simply because I'm a prosthetic case myself. The best hearing aid that was ever built is just terribly inefficient so far as the natural hearing is concerned. The best set of dentures that were ever built is very inefficient so far as natural teeth is concerned. And I build those cases, and I build them in centric relation. I used anatomical teeth. I built them on a semi-adjustable articulator. I took a functionally generated path, and I did all the grinding on the upper to accommodate that so the patient would never be, if they had an acquired centric or habitual centric, synonym for different things where you're in protrusion, I never locked them in. I gave them plenty of freedom between their ocentric, which is actually an acquired or habitual centric, and their hinge axis centric. And teeth that looked like teeth, and they were antogonal. They could chew with it. And it was a mortar and pestle effect. The lower buccal cusp was in the central fossa of that upper, and that dimple was always bigger than the cusp that fit into it. And they could go back to centric, and they had freedom in there. So they could function with it, and they could chew with it. And we gave them comfort, function, health, and aesthetics, but we never gave them the function or efficiency we give them natural teeth. But the best set of dentures, and I got paid for it, but I had to explain it. And we had a fellow in Greensboro, North Carolina, named Miller. He was in the Chevrolet business. He had a partner, and he had a heart attack. And Mrs. Randall, the same woman that sent Miss Blanchard in to me, sent this fellow in to me to have dentures made from Fort Lauderdale. He's retired. He retired because he had to, because of his heart condition. The poor guy couldn't chew anything. He couldn't keep the lower denture down. He couldn't keep the upper one up. And he was in terrible condition. He'd had 5 sets of dentures made by 2 different dentists. One made 3 sets and another one made 2, and he couldn't chew with any of them. And when I saw him, how do you know you can do it? I had to explain all this thing to him. I said, we don't know if we can make a patient comfortable or not, because there's so many factors. The temperament of the patient. My temperament is such I'd have a heck of a time wearing dentures. If I get a raveling on my coat, I'd undress myself. I didn't cut it off because I can't stand things like that. And so who am I to say that anybody's going to make you comfortable? But I'll do, anyway, I use conditioning material, and he's keeping the upper up of Corriga, and the lower one, he was tolerating it. And I said, I'll do the best I can. There are only 5 things we could do, and I explained what those 5 things were. We'll take a good impression, mucostatic impression of your mouth. We'll take a good centric relation, and we'll put the type of occlusion in that I think will be beneficial to you, and aesthetic requirements and all that. And when we do that, that's all we can do. And so I'll tell you what my fee will be if you can't wear them. And he looked at me as funny. He said, well, I've got 5 sets that that I can't wear. I don't want another one. I said, well, I sure don't want you to have it, because that's not what your fee's going to be if you can wear it. And he looked at me and he said, well, what's that going to be? And I said, I don't know. It depends what I can do for you. And so I said, you wear them for 30 days, and you pay Miss Quick, my secretary, out there for it. And I told him what my average fee. Now, understand, my average fee is actually my minimum fee if you can't wear them. And I told him that. But I said, when we get through and you can wear them, then I'll talk to you about it. And I want you to feel comfortable and happy with it, but this is a situation. And he said, and I said, if you don't think it's worth what I charge you for it, when I tell you what it's going to be, I'll let you write your own ticket. Because Ms. Randall told me the kind of person you are, and I trust you, whether you trust me or not. And he looked at me real funny, and he said, well, you can't lose that way. I said, well, okay. So we made them. The lower, couldn't keep it down. I made another, couldn't keep it down. I had to use a crossbite because he'd had shrinkage up here about like this, and big lower and little upper. I had to use the upper lingual cusp as a working cusp in the central fossa of the upper. And I changed it this time when I made the second one. He couldn't keep the lower one down even with that. And old Dr. Devan, Mueller Devan, up in University of Pennsylvania, had been in our American Prosthodontic Society group, and he told me on the side now what he did with cases like that. So he had a great big lower, and the lingual of the 2 bicuspids in the first molar, I took a 558 Fisher burr, and I went in there, and I took out a block between those teeth all the way back to the 2, to say all the way back to the second molar, and up here. And I took Kerr's blue inlay wax and I squeezed it into that and cast it out of gold. Today it's $300 an ounce. It'd be a little bit different than $35 an ounce. But I guess you could use some other kind of metal. And then I put it in with quick current acrylic and covered it with gold. But you could actually see it. And I used about an ounce of gold. And that did the trick. I thought he's died since then, and of course they would have got almost as much of that gold an ounce at that time. And when he died, it was about $700 an ounce, and I thought about his dentures, I just wondered what they did with it. I bet the undertaker knew it, he scuffed cotton in his mouth. I happen to know what goes on in some of those cases. But anyway, he was happy. And so he called me in about 30 days after this last episode. I didn't bother him. He trusted him. I called me up and he said, I'm coming down. I want you to take a look at me, and I want to talk to you, and I want you to have lunch with me. Well, that sounds pretty good. If you can eat well enough to ask me to go to lunch with you, well, then I feel pretty comfortable. He said, well, we'll talk about that. So he came. He did have fish, not steak. And and we had lunch, and we got back, and he said, well, what's the bad news? In other words, I want to pay you. At that time, $1,500 was a big fee for a set of dentures, because the average case was $300. That was the minimum fee. And he said, well, I'll tell you right now, I wouldn't sell them back to you for $5,000. So he paid me $1,500 for $5,000. He could chew with them. And, well, anyway, how do you handle your cases if I'd have told him $1,500 and he hadn't paid more than $200 for all the rest of them, now you see this is 40 years ago. $1,500 would be about $7,500 to $15,000 today, because we very minimum purchasing power is going down at least 10 times for automobiles and many other things. So your fee things that we're going to get into next is related to all of this. So you can get paid for this. The only dentures that ever fits are the ones that are here, because the blood clot fills up the space where it didn't fit. And when you have shrinkage and you make your so-called permanent cases, they don't fit by about 7% to start with, because you get that much dimensional change with acrylic, 4 to 7%. But if you use the KC laboratory thing in St. Louis, Kansas City, who is a fellow by the name of Smith, Clark Smith, spent his entire life developing this thing and his injection technique. You know what I'm talking about? Injection technique. You only have 1%, but the old vulcanite dentures, best fitting thing we ever had, because they fit that Weinstein model. And they lasted, and they didn't have an elastic memory that the acrylics have. And of course, another way you can get away with this, and I almost did it, but I make a failure, and I didn't know it's so big, is to cast a gold base and put your acrylic on top of it. And that's the ideal way to do it. And if I went back to doing denture work again today, I'm pretty sure this is the way that I would cast more gold bases. Metal bases. Gold is, because of the weight of it, very helpful denture work. So I hope this. Oh, one other thing I want to say here. What about the group in New Jersey and New York? I've been there 7 times. Nearly all the cases of philosophy thing we stopped at the 3rd time. But the one, Thibodaux, Louisiana, I kept going, and I did that. I did about 4 cases. 3 others, other than the one the perennial sophomores, was 25 years last year. We're meeting in Jamaica for the 26th time, but I'm not teaching anymore. I said, you bled me white. I'm going to be one of the boys, and I'm paying my own expenses. If you want to do something for the Institute, you can do it, but don't expect me to get up the thing. And that'll be the 26th year. But about the 7th or 8th time when I was in New York, I got a letter from the leader of this thing for 7 years. I won't tell you his name, but he was from New Jersey, but we always had it at the same hotel in New York. And last year was the 10th time. About the 8th time, which was 2 years ago, he wrote me a letter from Bermuda, a 4-page letter, and said, Dr. Pankey, I want to make a confession to you. And when you're up here next time. So the first day, which was on Tuesday at break, I asked him, I said, Murray, what's your confession? What is that 4-page letter? He said, you have a guilt complex and you want to make a confession. What is it? He said, I don't want to tell you till your class is over with tomorrow. I don't want to affect what you're going to say. And so he told me. And what did he say? He said, God didn't cut me out to do what you talk about. Now, what are you saying? He said, I can do this thing back here for the youth. I can do this up to here. But when you pass that, I just can't tear people's mouth down. I don't have technician. It's not my temperament. I'm not comfortable with it. I've tried some of it, and I just don't want to do it. And so what I have done, and he said, I can do a good job as anybody. I've really studied for denture work. I said, well, I guess everybody ought to, because some people come in with a teeth loss, and I can do it. But in this particular area, and I tell my patient, I'll take care of you. And I draw this on a chart and say, I can take care of you from here to here. I can take care of you here. And if you have friends that lose their teeth and going to have dentures or already have dentures, I'm very comfortable and very happy to take care of them. But in this particular area, I just was not given the talent. You know, some people can sing and other people can't sing. I said, yeah, I can't carry a tune. It make any difference how much I work. I couldn't be a singer like Pavarotti. But on the other hand, and I read a thing the other day written by Sidney Harris about self-esteem. You shouldn't set up your self-esteem too high because maybe you're exceeding your ability to perform. And so you cannot judge your self-esteem by just what somebody else has done. What Murray was telling me just that. And I told him, I said, by the way, I cut this out and I'm going to have it. I'm still get clippings, you know, that I pass on to people about self-esteem. And that's only 2 weeks ago that I read this. He said, some people were born with a low horsepower four-cylinder motor. Other people were born with V8 and turbocharged. And we can't expect somebody that was born. Now, Dennis is not in that classification. If you were born with a V8, with a four-cylinder motor, you couldn't even get in dental school. You had to have the potential. So I think there's nobody that can't use what we're talking about. If you're not comfortable with it and you don't want to do it, this is your circumstances. You set your objective because of your temperament. And that's why I told Murray, I said, look, I'm sure you could if you wanted to, but if that's your temperament and that's your objectives and that's what you want to do, and then God bless you, except don't, and I said, I send them to somebody and let them do it because there's anything wrong with that. So I just thought I'd pass that on to you. I think we've covered this. I have to finish here in 15 minutes, and I want to talk about this last thing. What is the fee structure? What is your fee structure? About the patient's ability to pay. Now, a Class 1 patient is a patient who has a high appreciation for dentistry. You did a good job of bringing that up. You know, Dr. Davis, we're trying to get up a teaching manual or a book so that we can follow the same terminology when we talk about patient. The thing that I'm finding too much with this philosophy work, everybody adapts the philosophy to their own circumstances and their own objectives and their own temperament. There isn't anything wrong with that. The ministers do that. One of the most intellectual ministers that we've ever had in our church drove off his congregation. The time he left, we lost 35% of our congregation. And he was a good, and he used the Bible. Now we have a boy, a man, that has brought that congregation back up to where it was before. He is not as intellectual as the other fellow, but he could communicate. Which is another way of saying that your ability probably is secondary. It's terrible for me to say that, but that's the way it all bounces. But your ability ought to be good enough to do what you set out to do to save people's teeth. But your real thing is, your real problem is communication. And I don't know how Richard, he spends a lot of time in this field with Sorensen, who's one of the best men in the country on it. How does Sorensen feel about that statement? Well,
True.
Absolutely true. It's hard for me. I've always preached pretty much the technical part. But on the other hand, I really think secondary. But I tell you one thing, these preachers shouldn't rewrite the Bible. I don't care whether you're Presbyterian or whether you're a Catholic or whatnot. And even the Hebrew people, the Old Testament, at least they stick to the thing, and it's all right for you to interpret all of this and use it in accord with your own circumstances, your objectives, and your temperament, and the people you serve. Is that clear to you, what I feel just now? You can't do otherwise. Make it practical. But don't try unless you help us write the Bible. Now, Bill, am I talking to you?
Sure are.
Now look, one of the biggest things we do, now one of the men is one of our assistant teachers, you'll get him in C3 because he's an excellent dentist. He practices what he preaches, but he doesn't teach the philosophy like it should be taught, in my opinion. I said, I want to hear you. I'm going to leave next week, and he's going to be here to teach C3. And I don't want him to teach C3 unless he does a better job than he's been doing. Now, look, he is using it in his own practice and getting away with it, and I don't fuss with that. You can use the philosophy any way you want to, as long as it serves your purpose and it does a job. Because how are you going to do it any other way? You can't use it because I said it. You want to do it because you feel it. And it fits your circumstances. How you can relate to it, no, and that's perfectly all right. But when I asked you what is a class 1 patient, I expect you to say is a patient that has a high appreciation for dentistry. Now, how high is high? You don't know. What's hi-fi? Hi-fi is different things to different people. But that means he appreciates good dentistry. And 90% of your patients come in are class 3s. They don't appreciate good dentistry, and your job is to communicate with them to teach them and make them want good dentistry. And what is their potential? A class 1 patient has a high appreciation for dentistry and the ability to pay any fair fee without an economic hardship. A class 2 patient may have the same IQ as appreciation for dentistry with the average ability to pay, and a 2- like Eleanor Wilson I was talking about. She's a school teacher. The circumstances in her life, she lost her husband, her arthritic mother died, and a spastic brother, and she's losing her teeth because all these years she couldn't have dental work done. And then she sought out somebody that had a reputation in the community trying to save people's teeth and wanted to find out what could she do. I saw she's a class 2-. Oh, there is almost a class 2 double minus, meaning she's really tough. She could not pay it unless I put her on a budget plan. And I had to take a long time for her to pay me. Didn't even pay the laboratory bill in the beginning. And you couldn't put her on a holding program because she's just about ready to go over the dam. In other words, she was way over here. She was not quite this bad. She was back in here, about here. She had enough bone left, that woman never lose her teeth. But I got a class 2- fee out of her, and then made it possible for her to pay for it. Now the thing, what I'm really saying to you, don't change the classification unless you've got something to offer a lot better. And then let us know what it is. Nobody's ever come up with an answer to that. Now you can say a class 1 plus. Well, we're going to get into that. A class 1 is a patient who has a high dental IQ. Man, these things really dry up in a hurry. I have to keep them covered. What he did with all this good high dental IQ. Plus the ability to pay any fair fee without an economic hardship. And the class 2 patient is a patient who has a high dental IQ plus average ability to pay. Now, a class 2-. Now, this is the thing she's questioning in there. How high is their IQ? How high do they? And then that depends on how good a job you do to communicate with those patients in accord with their understanding and all those things. Now, this is an internal conflict between the patient and the dentist. So, a 2- has high appreciation for dentistry. Now, you might say, where was this woman all this year that she was being neglected? She knew she was not going to the best dentist. She was going to somebody that she could afford. If you had an HMO in dentistry, she'd been going to that. She would take her insurance that she was entitled to if she had an insurance policy. And she would take the assignment. You know, when you go to somebody and say, well, I'll take the assignment. Now, a lot of these physicians will take the assignment on a class poor people patient. I'll do it for the assignment. I'll do what Medicare pays, or I'll do it what your insurance policy pays. Other men will say, well, I'll apply for Medicare, I'll apply for your assignment, but I can't do it if you pay the difference. Fortunately, in the United States, you can do that. So insurance is not as vicious as it is in England. In England, you either got to fish or cut bait. You can't do both. You can have a private patient, or you have to take it for what the government will pay you. And that's going to be not very much. It's going to be here in the beginning, and then you cut it down. About the third or fourth time, there's no way you could make a living unless you... I owe Peter Glazebrook a letter. He's the chairman of that group over there. And 9 years ago, I guess it is now, he was about ready to quit dentistry. And I could take me 20 minutes to tell you, but I can't tell you the story. Now, he's 100% in private practice. He's busy. He has an associate, and he's busy. He has a son that's graduated in the meantime, and he's never seen a social program patient, and he's busy. He's still in the same office that his father was in, who was the dentist. And quit dentistry simply because he couldn't do it like he wanted to do it because he couldn't get paid for it, and he had saved enough money and he quit. Peter was going to have to quit and do something else because he had 3 boys to educate 8, 9 years ago. Richard was the oldest one. But today he knows the difference, and he is really working his head off to do in England or what we have been trying to do over here. So the thing of it is, these people are below the average. They have to make a real economic sacrifice to have dental work done. And you have to be able to sell them on the idea that they should do everything you can and you will work with them. And so what you do, you draw a line there because these people are class 3s and they have a low appreciation for dentistry. Low dental IQ, but varying ability to pay, from low to medium to high. And it's not so much you can do just as good a job as you want to, but some of these people just cannot be brought up. Bring them up here as far as you can and understand empathy. Put yourself in the other fellow's position. If you want rapport, you know what rapport is? Meeting of the mind. Meeting of the mind. If you want rapport, you've got to have empathy in your heart. Empathy means put yourself in the other fellow's position. If you understand how he's thinking and how he's looking at that, and he's taking care of his kids at home and having their teeth straightened and all that, maybe he's just going to have to do without himself. A lot of parents have to do without themselves in order to do things for their children. So learn to talk. How do you feel about this? If you don't have their hand in their pocket, if you have in your heart I want to help you. I want to do whatever I can, but I don't want to neglect you. I want you to have the say about this thing. How do you feel about this? See, well, Dr. Pankey, I understand it and all, but truthfully, I just can't do it. Well, as circumstances may change, maybe we could put you on a holding program. If they're back in here, if people are back in here, you can put them on a holding program until they can afford maybe to have more expensive type of work done. Holding program, clean their mouth up and teach them on home care and nutrition and talk about what I can do to help you that won't cost you too much until such a time that you can do it. I wish I had time to tell you about it. Patients that I've had people drive up in Cadillac automobile. My brother-in-law is a head of a General Electric supply corporation here. One of his best salesmen driving a Cadillac automobile. He only had 1 child. And my sister, hygienist, said, "Brother, Miss Lacey, you know that I'd met that couple, one of Charlie's best salesmen. And he's just the nicest fellow in the world, but he spends all his money because they live like a millionaire, but they're broke all the time." And she went to the dentist, and he wants to take all these amalgam fillings out because she's broken a side off of a tooth and wants to put onlays on. That's why she needed it. But she can't afford it. And will you see her and talk to her and explain what the situation is, because he is connected with us? I said yes. So she came in. And she went into all of this thing. 1 daughter, graduating from high school. She's going to go to Vanderbilt next year, and we just can't go into $4,000 or $5,000. $4,750. This boy's a protege of mine. In other words, he knows what I'm getting, and he's going to get the same fee. $4,750 at that time for 16 units. All of her posterior back of her custom. And I said, man, Lacey, he told you right. It needs to be done because you broke off the buccal crust or the lingual crust of the lower, whatever it was, and he's rounded it off with some amalgam with a 35 inverted cone burr, and you can do that. You can patch it up. And he said anything about a holding program. Said, no, what's that? And I said, well, until you can feel like it, you can get into this thing. You're not about ready to lose your teeth, and you can be put on a holding program. You have good bone around your teeth. That's one nice thing about amalgam fillings. You don't rub them off with your thumb. You don't have any interference. And so a lot of these nice inlays are doing more destructive than for amalgam filling. So we put on a holding program. And we held her for 4 years, and Eleanor graduated from Vanderbilt. And so we put a little pressure on her, she ought to have it done. And my sister was my hygienist, and he was still selling stuff for Charlie up the road to Pahokee and different places. And so she got married. So they had to have a big wedding, and they had to spend a lot of money for the wedding they couldn't afford. And just about the time I began to get over that, Eleanor had her first baby. It ended up I had her on a holding program for 9 years. Well, you can do patchwork for dentistry for people and it'll last for 9 years. It wasn't that way. Everybody be wearing dentures. And so it ended up, but finally the time came when she broke off a cusp up in Nashville, Tennessee, and I had to send her to somebody up there. And I said, now look, when you go to him, you tell him for 9 years I've been trying, because it was Jim Vaughn, Nashville, Tennessee. And tell Jim Vaughn, he's one of the best dentists in Nashville. If you want to stay up there, let him do it and rebuild your mouth. So I told him and said, yeah, I wondered about that because Dr. Pankey's supposed to be a big shot, and if he'd been taking care of you 10 years and he's telling you your mouth looked like this, well, I think he's just like all the rest of us. That's Jim Vaughn. So that made it a little easier for me to get her back. So it ended up when it came back. 10 years we kept this woman on the head. You don't put people on a holding program that are losing bone and TMJ. It depends on the condition. In other words, we got away with it. So a holding program can be used. Now we have a class 4 patient. A class 4 patient is a patient that has neither in money. In other words, these people don't, intellectually and sociologically and economically, they'll never be any better. 10 to 15% of your population. It depends on your location a lot. If I went back to Newcastle, I couldn't do. Somebody asked me, could you do the same thing in Newcastle if you came back as you're doing in Coral Gable? And I said, no, why not? Well, the patient. There's too many people out there that don't have any money. A lot of them don't just have a high school education. Everything else being equal, people have money and they have a college education and they're doing well. It's a different classification of patient. It depends on your location. You can go out here in the northwest section where you have the grease monkeys at the airport and all those people that live out there. All you got to do is look at their home and the yard and the cars and everything else. You know what your potential is there. But you go out Coral Gables and the taxes are twice as much, and 3 times or 4 times, and the pickup garbage is on the street out there, and there they take it out there. They take it every other day during the week, 6 days a week, Monday, Wednesdays, and Friday. You understand what I'm saying? Where do your patients live? What home they live in? What is their educational level of the people? All of those things has to do with patient classification, and not really. Patients that have a class 3 patient is a patient that has a low appreciation for dentistry. But the thing for you to do is to bring them up here as high as you can, and your potential is those things I'm talking about. If you can find anything to replace this, please let me know what it is, because this is the thing that we developed years ago, and it took me 15. I really was 15 years before I talked about it, and it's 5 more years before I started teaching it. 20 years. And it's too doggone long to wait 20 years something. So you can do it. Then if you have, you may not, you don't, there's a lot of people who are Class 1 plus. These are well-to-do people. There's just a lot of Class 1. These people run the drugstore and the Chevrolet dealer and even the foreman and things. We have a friend that's our second door neighbor, and he has a 44-foot Bertram that made out here. This thing cost $185,000, $190,000 and up, depending on whether it's diesel powered or more. He has people working for him that are Class 1. He's Class 1 plus. Well, actually, he's a Class 1 double plus. But he's a self-made man, and the self-made people are very reluctant to turn loose with it. But the second generation, it's easier because they didn't have to work for it. And then the third, they say it's 3 generations from shirt tail to shirt tail. And this 75% of the cases, this is true. But there's some, it's not. Henry Ford II was, but he's an exception rather than the rule. All the Forbes family are a bunch of Scotchmen, and every one of them are tight. But they're all wealthy. Old B.C. Forbes started in with nothing in 1917, writing for the New York Times and a financial thing. And Forbes, they own the Forbes building in New York, and they train loads of things go out every 2 weeks. And they are one of the wealthiest family in America today. And Malcolm Ford Jr. is the first, second, he's just the 3rd generation. And he's as hard-working as his grandfather was. And he's probably as frugal as his grandfather, too. But 1 or 2 of the boys are in the Irish spendthrifts, you know. His father was. He's a balloonist and a motorcycle rider, and his father is not quite as old as I am. But I've been taking Forbes since 1926. I've never missed an issue since 1926. So I came to know Malcolm when they used to have the Highlander. They've had 3 yachts in that time, and they gave you down for a cocktail on the fantail in order to get the name on the book so they can take it off the income tax. And that was back in the days of Kittering, you know, General Motors was docked right next to him. I was telling him about that yesterday to Lauren Miller when we went to Joe's for Stone Crab just in lunch, about the Kittering Foundation and Cancer Clinic in New York, with the man that discovered your self-starter and your battery and your lights on your car and all that. And Olive K was his wife's name, and that's his name of the yacht. And the Forbes docked their boat right next to it. Well, that's beside. What were they? All of those people are Class 1 triple plus. This Earl Poe gave me this book called The Rich and the Super Rich. It's talking about these 2 people. Gave the names of them and how they made their money. You don't talk about this because there's a lot of wealthy people. We went to England this summer on the QE2. And I said, you know, it gripes me to have to pay $1,000 difference for 5 nights. That's $200 a night for each one of us just to travel first class. When the other's just better than I ever expected in my life. But I've been talking about this so much, I just want to see who does pay that. And so, you know, have 1 sitting at the table instead of 2, so we can go there and just eat your head off for 2 or 3 hours. The other way, we'd have to get up when we should. And we went. And the funny thing is, it was crowded. It had more people in it. And I looked at all of those people, and I want to tell you, 75, 80% of them had poor dental work. One of them used to be John Lindsay, you know, was mayor of New York City, and I heard him twice. And he's a wonderful speaker. He's a private lawyer in New York now, down on Wall Street. made a wonderful talk. Fact of business is to hear him and two other fellows was worth the difference in $1,000. One of them was a historian at Oxford University and talking about the cathedral, the Canterbury Cathedral, and where Becket was murdered, and all the things about Becket. And we'd been there, and we were going again on this trip, and one other, Dress for Success. This fellow that wrote the book on it is, what's his name, John Malloy, M-O-L-L-O-Y, Malloy's book on Dress for Success. In other words, as dentists, we ought not look like truck drivers. We ought to look like professional men and the personnel. And just one day I picked up a lawyer in the First National Bank building, and he said, LD, on the way to the Kiwanis Club. And he said, what his wife's name, and she's in the car today. Will you pick me up? You got to pass right by. I said, sure, I'll be glad to. Picked me up. He had a wild sports shirt on, short sleeve. He had a long, hairy arm. And it's August, and they didn't have air conditioning in the cars. And he got in the car, and I had a jacket on. And he said, LD, what are you doing wearing a coat on a hot day like this? I said, the same reason I have my pants on. Why? And he said, well, I think there's a lot of difference. And I said, well, it depends on your attitude. I said, I guess I have an inferiority complex, but I'm trying to be able to practice with people that judge people a lot of time by the way they look. And that's just the way I feel about it. He never wore a sport jacket. The one is after that, he always wore a jacket. He became mayor and the most successful dentist in Coral Gable, and he was just a struggling lawyer at that time, and he was the lawyer for the biggest bank when Tom Mays, when he died. He didn't thank me for 25 years. One day he said, LD, and he'd been Kiwanian always, and belonged to the same church, but he didn't tell me. One day he said, LD, I guess you've forgotten about picking me up at the bank. I said, yeah, I remember about that sports shirt, and I told you I was wearing my jacket for the same reason I had my pants on. He said, yeah, and I just want to thank you for it. I think it had its effect. I said, well, it's a little late, but I'm glad I lived long enough to hear it. We've gone over 7 minutes, and I wish I could have more time. We talked about, discussed Blanche's case. I had two more there. Busy. Dick Williams in Winchester, Indiana. This boy's in a town of 10,000 people. Dick Williams, dentist in Winchester. He has a son that graduated from University of Indiana just in the last year. And he's in with him. And Dick has been in practice about 30 years. He got into this work. First time he heard me was the first time I was ever on a program, and I was on with Archana Morrison. Anybody in here remember Archana Morrison? Well, she was on the program, and she was a real pro, and here I was a country boy, my first time I'd ever been on a state-side program. He was in that audience, and he said, I listened to you, and I knew you were having a little trouble, but you got the message, and he told me how many times he'd heard this. He had his own bungalow clinic. He had one of the best practices in the state of Indiana. You can be in a town of 5,000 people, 10,000 people, 100,000. Doesn't make any difference. It's you. There's always more people than you can possibly take care of. And the way you do it, because dentistry has a great future. You got to make a profession out of it and not a trade. The American College of Dentists fusses about this all the time, and I get very impatient reading some of the stuff that they have because they don't approach it right. We ought not expect the American Dental Association to do it. John Colby, I heard him for 30 minutes up in Louisville in April, and he's all excited, worried about losing members. And the members are not busy enough, and he's trying to bring the profession down to a level so everybody will be busy. Well, 54% of the dentists shouldn't be practicing dentistry. They never go to meetings. They just don't do those things. We can't do this. But if you get the upper 25%, how many of you have Pete Dawson's book? read the first page and a half. Read the first page that I wrote.
You wrote it.
I'm going to talk about that tomorrow. What is it tomorrow? Today's Wednesday, day after tomorrow, Friday. They're dedicating the West Coast Dental Society meeting, Pete Dawson. I'm going to talk on Friday. Missing the bank meeting, which I hate to do, but on the other hand, I got to go because Pete has done a great deal for dentistry. He is, I guess, is one of the few geniuses that we have in dentistry. He can talk about it, he can write about it, and he can do it. And he does a terrific job. So we can't be that. You don't need to be that. Sure, it'd be fine if we had a lot of geniuses, but somebody's got to do a lot of hard work, you know. But the thing of it is, if we can become in that upper 10%, and the fellow that is adept to do this, or the 36% that I said in there, that get up the ladder as far as you can in accord with your circumstances, your objectives, and your temperament. I keep looking at you because I started picking at you and your pretty wife there, so thank you for coming up and speaking to me anyway. But look, please stick with this, and we'll do our best to keep on breathing until you get here next time. Thanks you a lot for listening, and God bless you. Take care.